Egyptian police force's latest round of graduates have shown off their skills in an eyebrow and temperature-raising ceremony at a stadium in Cairo. The ripped recruits performed various feats of strength, jumping over cars, smashing cement blocks on each other's stomachs, and even dodging a giant wooden wheel set on fire.
أقسم بالله العظيم أقسم بالله العظيم.
The spectacle ended with a parade of officers in various levels of undress in front of Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Tonight's top stories. A leading Brazilian biomedical firm claims a COVID vaccine developed by China's Sinovac is safe. Wales set for a fire-break lockdown while Ireland announces 6 weeks of some of the most severe restrictions across Europe. And Russian hackers accused of targeting the Tokyo Olympics and French elections. Well, the number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world has now passed 40 million, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University in the US. The actual worldwide figure is likely to be far higher, as testing has been variable. Many people show no symptoms, and some governments have concealed the true number of cases. More than 1.1 million confirmed deaths have been reported. The US, Brazil and India are reporting by far the highest number of cases, although the increase in recent weeks has been driven by the surge in Europe.
About half of our member states within the European region have experienced a 50% increase in cases in the last week, and if you actually put that to a 1/3 increase or more, that goes up to more like 2/3 countries. So clearly, across the board, we're seeing large increases in cases. What we are also beginning to see now, is hospitalisation starting to track that, and even deaths beginning to track that. And certainly, going back even a couple of months, we would have maybe had 2,000 to 3,000 deaths per week. Even as much as 2 months ago, but now we're seeing a very large increase in the number of deaths per week, and it's now approaching something like 8,500 deaths per week across 48 countries.
Meantime, Chinese pharmaceutical group Sinopharm says it may have the capacity to produce more than 1 billion doses of coronavirus vaccine next year. The firm has completed 2 vaccine production plants in Beijing and Wuhan and will begin mass production once the vaccines get approval. 2 inactivated vaccines have started the final stage of clinical trials in 10 countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Argentina and Egypt. The government says 4 of China's vaccine candidates have entered phase 3 trials, and over 60,000 people have been injected with no severe adverse effects reported. Well, New Zealand says it's staying out of a growing stoush between the Commonwealth and state premiers over Kiwi travellers entering states that haven't signed up to the Trans-Tasman travel bubble. Another flight from New Zealand arrived at Sydney Airport overnight. Health officials say the movement of the New Zealanders within Australia isn't a matter for Kiwi authorities.
I do know there has been some issues for New Zealanders who had travelled to New South Wales, then joined connecting flights to other part of Australia. My sense is that that is something that the Australian states are sorting out, and are they the only ones who can sort that out?
Australia will be joining the Malabar naval exercises to be held by India, Japan and the US next month. It's the first time Australia has taken part since 2007, before pulling out due to concerns over relations with Beijing. Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd says Australia's armed forces should also continue engaging with their Chinese counterparts.
Beijing's reaction to this will be negative as well, which is why I believe it's important for the Australian government and the Royal Australian Navy to also hold out the hand of the Chinese to participate in joint exercises within the framework of humanitarian exercising that was foreshadowed through the East Asian Summit about a decade or so ago as well. So there are ways in which you can reduce the strategic and political tension which arises from this action. But for our friends in India and Delhi, this is a good development. India's attitude to this sort of exercising has changed fundamentally since India experienced its own border clashes with Beijing over the course of the last 3 months, where we saw the loss of quite a number of lives in one of the biggest blow-ups on the border in decades.
Well, NASA has selected Nokia to build the first cellular network on the moon. The Finnish phone company says it'll build a 4G system on the lunar surface in late 2022. NASA is planning to return humans to the moon 2 years after that, with the goal of establishing a long-term human presence there. Well, that raises so many questions for us, so let's get more from astrophysicist Claire Kenyon on this very ambitious project. Claire, lovely to talk to you. Oh, why does the moon need 4G?
Well, I mean, first of all, 4G, we'd all be familiar that 4G was the upgrade from 3G. Now, 3G just stands for third generation. 4G is fourth generation. And when we think about 4G, 3G, 5G, we think about internet, we think about telephones. But really, it's just about download speeds of information. So basically, 3G is 20 megabits per second. 4G is actually 100 megabits per second download minimum. Now, interestingly enough, our networks these days are only just starting to reach that, which is what LTE means. So LTE stands for long-term evolution, and that was actually a marketing ploy for 3G moving to 4G. So if you see 4G LTE, just know that LTE is a little bit of a sneaky marketing thing there. But why do we need that on the moon? Well, we need it for exactly the same reasons we need it on Earth. We need it to communicate. We need to be able to send and receive information. And if we want to make a sustainable base on the moon or Mars in the future, we actually need to be able to communicate in real time from the moon to the moon, from modules going around in orbit in the moon to the moon. So I'm talking videos, everything we do on Earth, HD videos. We need to be able to control robots. We need to be able to call back to the orbiter, and we need to be able to send large packets of information very quickly. And we can't afford to be relying on linking all the way back to Earth. So that's why 4G is needed.
So now that's fascinating, and thank you for explaining it so well. So then that takes us to how serious this push is by NASA for this human presence on the moon. How realistic is it?
Well, I think it's quite realistic now. We've got the perfect coming together of sort of three things. As you would know, it's been over 50 years since the first person walked on the moon. So now we've got an increase in the technological capabilities. We've definitely got a bit of an increase in interest. And basically, one of the most key factors is the combination of government and private partnerships. So now that we actually have all those technologies, it's kind of got too big for governments just to control and space agencies just to control on their own. So they're starting to tender out their projects for technology design and certainly taking us up to the moon and all the other little bits and pieces to other private companies. And that sort of divestment is seeing a whole host of technological advancements.
How many people, how big is this base potentially going to be?
Oh, goodness knows. At the moment, they're really planning. Artemis program is a NASA program at the moment that they're planning to. Artemis 1 is basically testing out their new SLS rocket and their Orion partially reusable space capsule. And that's the first one. So Artemis 1 will do that, and that'll go out we're thinking 2021. And then in 2022, we're looking at a manned, a crewed mission that will actually go around the moon 6 times opposite orbit. We call that a retrograde orbit. And then what they're actually going to build is this thing called a gateway, which really just sounds like a movie to me. But basically, just like the ISS goes around the Earth, this gateway will be going around the moon. So it's sort of like the next stop to the surface. And then from there, we're looking at Artemis 3, 2024, when we will actually see the first woman walk on the moon.
Wow, that's going to be exciting. That in itself is going to be worth it. Let's talk about what NASA's up to with the asteroid Bennu.
So Bennu is really cool. So actually, part of the thing that's really interesting about the moon is that it's somebody's actually described it as a 4 billion year old museum just quietly collecting information. And it can tell us a lot about the formation of the solar system and in fact, the history of Earth. And asteroids, particular types of asteroids, can actually tell us information from even before this time. So Bennu is this type of asteroid called a carbonaceous chondrite. And what's interesting about these things is they actually have organic carbon in their structure. Now, Bennu is this sort of loose rubble of bouldery kind of asteroid that kind of looks like a diamond, but it spins really fast. And it's a real challenge to get down there and sample some of this seriously valuable carbon material, which can help us understand our origins. And certainly origins of the solar system actually contains some materials from previous solar systems, previous stars, which I think is fascinating. So what's going to happen is this mission called OSIRIS-REx, which has been going around Bennu for almost the last 2 years, is actually going to leave orbit, fire its thrusters, come down, navigate into this little tiny space. We're talking like a couple of car park spaces in the size of a tennis court, come down, touch the surface for 16 seconds, scoop up material, and then come back to Earth. So we'll be seeing some of that material, hopefully, 2023.
Fantastic. Before you go, will there be Netflix on the moon? That's all I want to know.
Well, 5G is 1 gigabit per second, so hopefully, we'll need to beam it up there, but that's the whole point, isn't it? We want to make it livable.
Absolutely. New meaning to the word Netflix and chill. Thanks so much. It's been terrific to have you make so much sense of all of this, Claire. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. What a smart cookie. I hope she's the first woman on the moon. That would be great. Well, with millions of Australians now working from home, criminals are exploiting their less secure computers and Wi-Fi networks to launch cyber attacks. New research shows the surge in hacking and online scams is costing the country billions of dollars. Here's NEWSThe.
When coronavirus emptied our cities, cyber criminals saw their moment.
The attackers have taken advantage of the situation.
More than half of malicious attacks are financially motivated. These are professional criminals.
Between April and June, there was a 65% leap in corporate cyber attacks. Breaches cost companies an estimated $7.6 billion in the past financial year.
That's a significant amount of money, and often that cost is going to be passed back to consumers through an increase in the price of their products and services.
From offices and secure servers to millions of devices powered by home Wi-Fi.
You've got IT departments in big organisations. They used to have 1,000 people in a downtown office. Now they've got 1,000 people they've got to manage at kitchen tables from Wagga to Wangthaggi.
This year, ransomware attacks have crippled businesses as varied as logistics companies, steel mills and country hospitals in Victoria. Information is stolen or systems crippled unless companies pay a ransom to criminals.
We are seeing an expectation that attacks will continue to increase.
Millions of office workers took their jobs home with them in March. Many haven't been back, many won't go back. This is the new office. For cyber criminals, the weakest link is the warm body sitting at the keyboard. But simple steps can protect you. Use encryption on your laptop. Always have a passcode on your phone. Use two-factor authentication that requires a text message code to log on. Keep operating systems updated and use password manager software to keep on top of them all.
And don't reuse passwords. That's a bad idea.
NEWSThe, ABC News.
One country that has attracted a lot of attention during the coronavirus pandemic has been Sweden. It has never opted for lockdown, instead keeping its economy open but relying on individuals to do the right thing, wearing masks and socially distancing. But now with COVID-19 surging across Europe, Sweden is quietly toughening up its approach for the first time. Here's Jason Om.
Sweden's COVID cases may be back on the rise, but for Australians Astrid and Andrew in Stockholm, there doesn't seem to be a lot to worry about.
In Sweden, we've had a lot of freedoms. I think that we feel very relaxed here compared to back home. I think there's a lot less anxiety. We feel very secure in our jobs and in our day-to-day lives. So I think it's definitely a big difference.
They've been living and working in Sweden for several years, and today they're enjoying a taste of home at an Australian-themed pub.
You know, we have pies on the menu. We have palmies or palmas if you're from Victoria. You know, we have Aussie beers. We have Aussie wines. We sell Vegemite. The most prized possessions, the Tim Tams.
Last Cooper's Pale in Sweden.
Yeah, mate.
It was.
We're not doing so badly, and we're not having to lock down multiple times or anything, and it's starting to sort of make some sense to the, you know, slowing things down but not locking it down entirely.
That's why I said piano player.
We've still managed to maintain a good social life, I think, and now it's almost back to normal, I would say. We're still keeping social distance. We're very careful when we meet our friends. We're not hugging anyone or kissing anyone anymore. We're careful when we meet strangers in public.
Cafes and restaurants were allowed to remain open.
What can I get you?
I'll take a pail, thanks.
Sure.
But it's been a rough few months for pub owner Kylie Pengelly-Linker from country South Australia.
We were going really well, and then March hit, and it just, you know, I just saw like my business disappeared. So, can you stop?
Swedes naturally stayed at home, and then Kylie got COVID.
Unfortunately, I actually got sick in April, so we had to close our doors for at least 3 weeks while I was recovering.
But business is bouncing back.
So we make our own pies. Come into the kitchen. This is Nada, our chef. Hello. Our pies are the best pies in Sweden. Don't let the Kiwi guy say anything else. We're getting to a point where we have to turn people away because we don't have enough seats, and nobody can be in here without sitting down. So it's actually, you know, you're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Earlier this year, it was Sweden against the world as it chose to keep its economy open. But it suffered a high death toll when compared to its lockdown Scandinavian neighbours. So far, nearly 6,000 Swedes have died. While the overall case numbers are still far lower than other European nations, Sweden is facing its largest increase in months.
I think we're doing reasonably okay. On the other hand, we do see an increase, and I think that it's important to take care of that as quickly as possible.
Chief epidemiologist Anders Tegnell is against lockdowns, but now his softer strategy is under pressure after a wild summer among young people.
It's very much connected to the end of the summer holidays, many people coming back to their workplaces. So our primary theory is really that this is very much connected to many more people being at their workplaces, a place where we know a lot of transmission takes place. And then we have a fair amount of signals that there is a fair amount of parties going on, especially among young people.
In a significant shift, he's told 7:30 that shutting down some businesses might now be an option to drive the cases down.
We have a number of other measures that we could enforce locally, maybe closing down certain stores, stuff like that, maybe restricting the use of public transport even more than it is today, enforcing to work from home even more than it is today.
In a first step from this week, regional authorities will be able to make public orders to avoid areas like shopping centres and gyms, and events like sports matches and concerts. But there won't be any fines. Sweden maintains it's all part of the strategy.
We're going to be responsible. We're not going to lose our guard and do anything that's risky. Sweden has taken definitely a more holistic approach to the virus, which we think is a lot more realistic in the long run. I mean, they understand that there's a lot of mental health issues associated with a poor economy, with people losing their jobs, with job insecurity and so on. So the strategy here is much more beneficial in the long term.
Geelong superstar Patrick Dangerfield has dismissed any concerns about the fitness of Cats forward Tom Hawkins ahead of Saturday.